Okay, I thought I would do a quick run through of the configuration I've done on this copter. Rather than just do endless videos, I'm going to run through all of the config settings that I've changed, just so you can see that. So you can see Mission Planner here, that I've loaded the copter up. And these are unchanged. So the first thing I've changed is RP Expo, so it's 0.6. This is the new 4.2 RP Expo value, and this is what Beastflight refers to as Super Rate Expo, and this gives quite a nice feel. So it's sort of soft in the middle, but sharp at the edges. Quite a high roll pitch rate, so 600 degrees a second, and then I've done the same for yaw here, 0.6 and 600. And also I've set Acro Trainer to 0, so this allows me to do flips and rolls. If you're not familiar with Acro, then keep Acro Trainer at the default, which is 1 or 2. I can't remember which one. These are unchanged. I don't think I had to set GPS use to 1, but maybe I did. These are unchanged. HRS not changed, not changed, not changed. So I've actually got angle max to 3000 centigrades here, so it's 30 degrees. So I will change this to be a much higher value when I want to start doing auto modes, but since this doesn't really affect pilot control modes, I haven't changed that. On down. So obviously all the ATC values are set by tuning. I'll do a separate value for that. Sorry, separate video. Let's move on down. The only thing to say is, as with my Chimera, I like setting ATC input TC to 0.08, which gives quite a crisp response. And then I'll leave over the tuning things. So that's all the ATC values. These are at the default throttle, mix man, mix max. When I actually go out flying, I'll set mix man to 4, which gives me a lot more attitude control when I'm flying. So 0.1 is probably too low for good attitude control, but I'll leave it there for the moment. Oh, and I didn't say at the beginning, I've got Acro option set to 1, so this means that air mode is active when I'm in Acro mode. So basically, you can always control the aircraft even if the throttle is at 0. Okay, back down here through all the ATC values. So I've got auto tune Agra set to 0.075. I found on the Chimera build that was a good way of coming up with a pretty stable tune, and actually the noise on this build is really pretty low. The gummies have worked pretty well, so I'm pretty happy with that. So I've set that to 0.075, and similarly I do this on all my small copters. So min D for auto tune I've dialed down to 0.0003. I can't remember whether this was necessary or not in the end, but probably can see if we look at the D values. So your D is above that, so it's not relative. Roll D is above that, and pitch D is above that. So actually 0.0003 was not really necessary, probably perhaps necessary for much smaller copters, but I just like to do that so I'm not missing D values that when I'm doing auto tune that are useful. So didn't do anything to avoid. Barrow, didn't do anything with Barrow. The battery settings should be set by the flight controller setup, which they are. I changed the battery capacity to 1300 milliamp hours because that's the size of battery I'm using. I will change that again when I switch to the long range lithium ion batteries, but yep. And then these pin values should be the same. Sorry, set by the flight controller setup. And then you've got 4S, so I think low volt and these sorts of things will be set by the little wizard you can get on Control A in Mission Planner. So this is set up for 4S, so low volt 13.2. Battery monitor again should be set by the flight controller setup, as is the multiplication, yada 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 yada. Battery 2, battery 3, battery, all of those not used. On down here, camera setup. So I am using a run cam. I haven't changed anything here other than say cam RC type is 1, which seems to work well for these UART controlled cameras. On down. So compass setup. So okay, so this is quite crucial. So these settings aren't changed, but I've got a custom compass setup. So compass orientation is set to somewhere down here, 100, which means custom setup. And then I've got the roll set to minus 40 degrees and yaw set to 90 degrees. So if you remember, on this copter, the compass is at the back. You can see that. I'll just unplug the battery for now. It's too hot. You can see that the compass is at the back, and so if you remember, I rotated it sideways, so I've had to measure this angle and also account for the sideways rotation, and that works out at roll of minus 40 degrees, yaw of minus 90 degrees, and that works fine. The compass is calibrated successfully on that basis. I don't have any other compasses on here. I've run compass mot, so you can see values from there, which I'll show you how to do in another video for the compass, for the Chimera 7. And then I think all of the other compass settings are largely the same, apart from compass orient. Nothing for compass 2 or 3. Okay, so we're on down here. Didn't really make any changes to the EKF, apart from all of these down here, apart from EKF magcal. So I think the default on magcal is 3, and I tend to set it to 0. So this triggers a yaw reset on the first climb if you set it to 3. And the reason that defaults to 3 is the assumption is there's a lot of magnetic interference when you take off and they're not in the air. But actually that's not generally the case for me with these copters. Not a lot of magnetic interference, and I wanted to use the calibration I've done sort of offline and not do a reset, because a reset can be quite, you get a sort of jerk in the air with the copter. So I tend to set magcal to 0. I don't think anything else on the EK3 setup I've changed, apart from source 1. So this says where the EKF is getting values for its sources. So I've got XY set to GPS. I've got the Z position set to the barrow, which is 1. I've got velocity XY set to GPS, which is 3. Got the velocity up down set to 3, which is again GPS, and then I'm using the compass. So I think most of these are the default, but no, nothing for source 2. On down, nothing for fence. I haven't got FFT enabled, so nothing there, nothing for flow hold. I've got a bunch of flight modes set up to my own preference, which I covered in another video. Frame class is 1, which is a quad, and then the frame type is 12. Now I'll show you later on, but actually, so this is Betaflight X, which if the ESC was mounted the right way around would be fine, but because it's mounted backwards, this is not sufficient, and so I've had to change the servo mappings. So although this sort of gets you some way there, it doesn't get you all the way there, and I'll show you that a little bit. On down, nothing for FR Sky, not using that. EKF failsafe action, I like the copter to just hang there in the sky if I go for an EKF failsafe to go to all hold. I don't like it landing, that's quite inconvenient. So I set that to 2, you get FS EKF action. Let's just pull this out a little bit so you can see this. Don't think I've set everything here. Throttle failsafe I set to 1. I think that's the default, which means that it always RTLs, which is useful. And then GPS, I don't think I've changed anything here. No, GPS all the same, lots and lots of GPS. Config, I've got GPS type is auto, possibly had to set that to get it to recognize the GPS type. And then end of GPS, nothing for GUID, nothing for initial mode. Right, so the gyro, the initial sensor settings. So Excel filter still set to 20, I think that might be the default. Fast sampling will get set by default on the board, so you don't need to mess with that. But I do have the gyro filter set to 150 Hz, so this is the same as the Chimera. And this is actually what I tuned with, and this worked quite well. I might try a few other options, but 150 Hz seems pretty good. And gyro rate is set to, I think that's set by default on the H7, so this means the back end rate is running at 2 kHz. So I didn't have to change that, but that's a good setting. And then the harmonic notch is enabled, so you can see I've enabled the harmonic notch. I've left the defaults for bandwidth and frequency at 40 and 80. The harmonics are set to 1. I think that will come out as the default. And then I'm using ESC telemetry, so H-notch mode 3. I'm also setting H-notch ops to 6, which means, so this is a bit mask, remember, and so bit 1, which is 2, and the number 2 means a notch per motor, and then bit 2, which is the number 4, means run it at the loop rate, so that's why I've got this set to 6. H-notch ref I have to set to 1, otherwise we get scaling on the H-notch. And then I have, I know I haven't enabled ARM. I'm struggling for log space on this. I've got the Kakut H7 with the smaller flash chip for logging, so I haven't got FFT logging on. I might put that on at some point in the future, but it just fills up the log too quickly. Yeah, okay. So that's the end of the notch and INS setup. I haven't done a temperature calibration. on this copter using TCal. I probably will at some point in the future, but when I get time. But you know, I'm not sure how much effect that will have. I will do that with time, and I've done a video for the Chimera 7 showing you how to do temperature calibration. Nothing else for LAN, nothing else for logging. Bitmask. I like log file DSR MROT, means rotate log files, which I always like to set. And the bitmask is set. In this case, I've set to 161,790, so this gives me a decent amount of information without overwhelming the logs. So it's not a big SD card that I can log loads of stuff to. It's just a flash chip, so you have to be a little bit careful here about fast logging of things. These are all the defaults. Loiter, nothing changed to loiter. Okay, so then onto the motor settings, and again, bat volt max, bat volt min. These get set by the wizard. So I've set these up for 4S. So max is 16.8, min is 13.2, and then PWM type 6, which means D-shot 600. Spin arm on this I've set to 0.03 and spin min I've set to 0.06. So on the Chimera we found spin min at a lower value meant that we sort of lost yaw authority when doing sort of aggressive maneuvers. So I set this to the same 0.06 value, and that seems to work quite well. Spin max I've set to 0.95. I think that's the default. I went up a bit higher on the Chimera, but I've no reason to adjust this from the default. And then thrust expo I've left, I think I've set 0.55 this is based on Leonard's tuning guide. Basically these are 5-inch props, so I think the tuning guide says 0.55 is the right value for expo for 5-inch props. I might see whether there's a better value for this. This may be too high, but once I get into sort of tuning a bit more. Thrust hover I've set to 0.11. This is based on looking at logs of doing a hover and see where that comes out at. And then the rest is default. No, I haven't got any LEDs on this, so no settings there. And then I've set up the OSD setup the same as I did on my Chimera. So channel 7 with a bunch of different settings to make sure I get different screens on the different different switch positions. So I won't go into that. Same as my Chimera 7 setup. Lots and lots and lots and lots of OSD setup. I've enabled parameter editing, so got OSD 5 and 6 enabled, which I quite like. No changes here. Your expo, I think I've moved this up to 0.4. If you remember, on Acro Expo, this is 0.6, and the yaw rate I've set to the similarly fast setting. No changes to the filters, I don't think. And then I and PSC XZI and P are, I is set to double P and P is set to the same value as MOT thrust hover. So these basically come from MOT thrust hover. Hadn't made any changes to jerk as far as I know, or any of these velocity changes. Nothing to rally. RC options, I've got YARPU enabled, so I've added 256 to the RC options. It comes out at 288. And I've got RC protocols set to 1, which is all. Well, I could set this just to CSF because that's what I'm using. And then I've got quite a small, I might lower these. So on the Chimera, I've got a much smaller dead zone, I think like 5 microseconds. So I might lower these. We'll see. And then I've got various RC options set in the same way for the Chimera for my setup. I won't bore you with those. Okay, whoops. So interestingly, just so you know, relay pin gets set to 81. This is by the firmware configuration. And actually what this means, what this does is it means that VTX power is enabled by default from the flight controller. You can get in, so it is, you can do this on a switch. So you could use a switch to control this on and off, to switch the power on and off, but by default it's set to 81, which means it's on, and you see the relay default is 1, which is on. If you set this to off here, then VTX power will be off, and you'll be very confused as to why your VTX isn't working. So the default is on here, but you can also use this to make this be controlled by a switch if you want. No more, not using a rangefinder. RSSI type is set to 3, is on the Chimera, so that means coming from the RX. And then similarly, I want 20 meters for RTL altitude, same as on the Chimera. Default's a little bit low. And I set schedule loop rate to 800. And okay, then the various serial parameters for this. So the way I've got it soldered up. So we've got serial 0 is the USB connector. Serial 1 is the GPS, I think. Oh no, sorry, serial 1. That doesn't look like right. It says serial 1 is RC input. Ah, okay, so this gets set automatically by the CRSF driver. So serial 1 is the RC input, so UART1. Serial 2 is Mavlink. Can't remember what that's connected to or whether it's even used. Serial 3 is the GPS. So set that to protocol 5. Serial 4 is the run cam. So protocol is 26. Don't think you have to set anything else there. It gets set automatically. Serial 4. Serial 5 is unused. Serial 6 is unused. Serial 7 is ESC telemetry. So set this to 16. And that's the end of the serial setup. And then we've got the BL Heli setup. So as always, set auto to 1 to allow pass-through to work. And I've got the bidirectional mask set to 15, which means channels 1, 2, 3, 4. I didn't have to change the rotation of anything. Motor poles is actually 14, so the motors actually do have 14 poles on them with little pancakes. And then T rate I've reduced to 5 Hertz because the RPM feedback is coming from the bidirectional D-shot. And then D-shot ESC set to 1 means BL Heli, so D-shot commands work, and I've set D-shot rate to 2, so it means double the loop rate. So that, because I've got a loop rate of 800, that means 1.6 kilohertz. And if I power this up, so pass through, so I'll just disconnect this and we will connect BL Heli. Let's just make sure we can see that. Nope. Okay, it's just bored. All right, so I've got BL Heli Suite up here. So I'm going to connect to COM 11. Then read the setup. Read the setup, okay, and now you can see what setup I've got here. So the most important thing for these Teco 32 F4s is that temperature protection must be off. So I think this is set to 140 degrees by default, and you may get a later rev, and in which case that is not. But the F4s have a dodgy temperature sensor on them, and what you find is if you've got this set, you'll get it throttling at very inconvenient moments. So you must set temperature protection to off on these ESCs. I've got low RPM power protect off, and then motor timing I've set to auto. That seems to work pretty well. Worked pretty well on the Chimera. And then on PWM frequency, I've increased the frequency high to 96 kilohertz, and so you'll get this. It'll sort of automatically go between these two frequencies based on load. And that is my BL Heli setup, which seems to work quite well. So we'll just hide that again and go back to Mission Planner. Okay, and we were down at Servo, nearly there. Whoops. Servo BLH, D-shot rate. Okay, so we got to D-shot rate. Nothing to do with FETEC. But servo functions I had to change. So, and there's a little bit involved. And so basically you've got the numbers, the servo functions 33 to 36 are the four motors. You've got to get these in the right order. So if you've mounted the ESC like I've done there, then you need servo 1 function to 36, which is motor 4. You need servo, oops, gone past that. You need servo 2 function to 35, which is motor 3. You need servo 3 function to 34, which is motor 2, and then you need servo 4 function to 33, which is motor 1, and that gives you the correct motor order. So I didn't need to make any other changes to the servo settings. Didn't really need to make any changes to the OSD stuff. That all seems to work fine. Sorry, the serial rate for Mavlink. And stack gets set automatically. Don't need super simple. And then I've got VTX enabled band and channel set up to what I want. There is a bug currently in Tracer 69 which I'm trying to resolve with Trapeze. So these actually don't work at all for me at the moment. I have to set this all up via the menu in my transmitter, but hopefully soon it will get fixed if I get the right firmware. And then Waypoint didn't set anything there. So that is my setup so far for this copter, prior and post tuning, and there we go.